So, to those of you just tuning in, to find the files, as usual, go to our steward page. So, at this URL, steward.iastate.edu/site/isugdc/downloads. Head there and then download animations in Unity with today's date on it, with tomorrow's date on it, with yesterday's date. That's wrong. I'll fix that later. Oops. So just go ahead and download that. And hit save. Not open, preferably. Sweet. Then you can start a new project. So we're gonna name this, anybody got a name for something, for a project?
Workshop 6.
Workshop, very inspired, wow. Workshop 6. You're even counting, I'm not even counting, that's pretty impressive. Go ahead, create that, ignore all of the thumbnails on my desktop. I need to do the thing I did on my laptop and just make a desktop 2 folder and just put everything in there. El Proyecto. Oh, I should have done that. Oh, I should have done El Proyecto. Somebody in chat said El Proyecto. That was pretty good. I mean, marginally better than Project 6, granted. That's a pretty good name in itself. But
I was going to suggest working through motions. It's animation.
I'd vote El Proyecto for president. I don't know, Zach, what did you buy? So oh, you know what? I gotta. Let me. There we go. Okay. I had my window set up as my usual thing, which might have been confusing if you guys have the default. So, once you get into your project, as usual, go to Assets, Import Package, Custom Package, and find wherever you downloaded it. Bunch of stuff. So today we're talking about animations. So we're going to be working with a lot of artwork. So there's a lot of sprites in here. So we're going to be making a 2D, very simple platformer that already works. So it's already got movement, it's already got jumping, it's got all of that handled, but it has no animations. Right now it's just a static, nothing moving around. So once you import those, go to Scenes and open up Main. Hello. I can give you a couple minutes to catch up as we as I look at all this stuff. Oh, you bought a Switch! Is it Breath of the Wild, Zach? I hope it's Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's really good. Now, Khalib, listen. I was saying it was marginally better as a complement to Workshop 6, not as an insult to El Proyecto, all right? It's Breath of the Wild. It is a good game, man. That game is super solid. Yeah, we were actually considering doing workshops in here, just because of you get the outlets in the floor and the movable tables. But then the issue was these TVs are really small, and it's a really wide room, so it's kind of weird if like people are sitting there and there, because it's like, hi Group A, hi Group B. So I just realized we should probably, never mind. Infinity chat. You're right, it is infinity chat right now. All right. So once you have the scene loaded, make sure to hit the 2D button up here near the top left of the scene view, and that will swap it to 2D view, which will make it much easier to navigate. Since we're working with 2D sprites, we don't need the 3D perspective. And then right now, if you separate your game and your scene view, and you have your player selected, you don't need to do this. You can just watch. You can see that it does move around, and you can control it. You can't see it right now because the sprite is invisible. There's no sprite loaded. But right now we have a functioning platformer in the most basic way, but with no visuals. And our goal is to get a character that can move around and jump around that's fully animated. So, are you caught up? Okay. I want to make sure I don't leave people behind. Because this is what is, oh my goodness, a lot of stuff. You now hit your goal? What?
Saying check the
Hey!
Hey!
Sweet. Thank you, Khalib the Mighty, for the $50 donation. We have now reached my personal goal, which is 150. But remember, our team goal is still 250. So we are getting there.
Buy $100. Yeah.
Getting close. Yep.
Make it easy for me.
Yep. We have another streamer who's going to be starting up a stream of some PS2 games. So definitely show him some love at some point. And toss some money that way. Help him reach his personal goal. But our team goal is 250. So we're getting close. Excellent work.
Hey, it's a kid's stream, so kids games.
All right, sweet, Nate. That's good to hear. That people won't be behind because of that. All right. So, how's it going? We good?
Yep.
Awesome, sweet. So right now our character is blank. So we can give them a sprite. So this isn't too hard. If you open up your art and the character folder, you can see a bunch of sprite sheets. Is anybody unfamiliar with what a sprite sheet is? It's fine. It's fine if you are. I'm going to explain it anyways. Yeah. So a sprite sheet is what you see here in this corner. And basically, it is multiple sprites as a part of an animation, basically laid out in a grid like this. So the idea being you would take this sprite for the first frame, and then you would replace it with the second sprite, and then replace it with the third one, and that creates a fluid animation. So we have a bunch of sprite sheets here, and we can drag them onto our player and make our player a whole sprite sheet, which is not ideal. That's not really going to be helpful. Having our character be an entire sprite sheet does not look good. So we want to isolate one of those. So Unity has a really nice built-in feature called the sprite editor. So as you can see, all of these textures, first of all, this is very important when you're importing things, needs to be texture type sprite, 2D and UI. Usually it's default, and a default texture does not work the same as a sprite. So definitely make sure that it's a sprite before you start. I think the stuff I included, I think, is sprite already, so you shouldn't have to mess with it. But after you've set it to a sprite, you can go into the sprite editor, right here, this button. And that will open up this extra window. And the sprite editor will let you slice up the sprite sheet into the proper sprites. So once you have this, you can, why doesn't this want to let me do it? What? Oh yeah, okay, my bad, I forgot a intermediary step. For sprite mode, right here, this option, you need to get rid of single and use multiple instead. And then you need to hit apply before you open up the sprite editor. I forgot about that step. So multiple is basically stating that this is multiple sprites in one single image. And so then you can go into the sprite editor, and you'll see we have one selected. You can say slice up here at the top left. And they have automatic, which is nice, but I prefer not to do that just to make sure that I'm getting the exact dimensions I want. Because if your sprite sheet is not uniform in size, it might lead to some janky animations that don't look correct. So for type, I usually do by cell count, the last one. And then I just give how many there are. So there are 4 columns here and 3 rows. And when you hit slice, it's really hard to see because it's white on white a little bit, but there are lines in between each of them. And if you click on them, you can see that they're all individual. I think I just moved one on accident. Don't move them. And then you can hit apply at the top here. And after hitting that and exiting out of this window, if you hit the arrow next to the preview for the sprite sheet, you'll see that we now have all of the individual sprites laid out. Yes, Zach, we're going to be streaming. We're going to be streaming until 11 p.m. So we've still got 10 hours of streams left. So yeah, we'll be doing plenty today. We're just taking a break to do the workshop and stream this for the people who actually want to get anything done. You know, for the people who don't want to just watch video games and maybe do a little bit of productive stuff. So, does everybody have all their sprites listed out now that they're all separated? Awesome. So, next we're just going to do that for all of them. So just run through and do them. You can ignore jump cloud. That was just sort of a test animation. And we'll use it as a test animation. But for now, okay, so yeah, never mind. Slice that one too. But go through, hit multiple for sprite mode, apply it, go to your sprite editor, make sure it is slicing these correctly. So I've got 4 columns, 2 rows, yes please, apply, exit, verify. When you hit the arrow, make sure that it's got all of the sprites listed out correctly. And then move on to the next one. Run through, do all these. What am I doing? Oh, I sliced this wrong. This is 5. The dust cloud is 5. 5 columns, not 4. All right. So.
I left the lights on the wall.
Where? That's fine. The lights are usually on. Then. When are you playing Sonic? Oh my, Trevor, oh you.
Oh, is Tanner gonna pop
Oh
by?
you. Tanner is in what, China?
Rome.
Rome?
Yeah.
Different
Sorry?
Okay, somebody said China, and I wasn't sure if they were just confusing Tanners or if they were actually. If Tanner was actually. I'm not talking
Tanner
about
in
this.
China?
Anyways. So, does everybody have all their sprites separated now? Yes? We've all got all 4 multiple out?
How many rows and columns each
How many what?
rows and columns?
For the jump cloud, it's 5 columns, 2 rows. Columns is just how many horizontally there are, and then rows is just how many vertically. So it's just 5 by 2. Okay. So I don't know how that got in there. So right now we have our player. That's great. Well, now we can give them, instead of the sprite sheet as a sprite, we can give them a single one. So if you open up basic grounded jump, I believe it's called. I had a weird naming scheme for this. If you select the second sprite, the one where he's standing, that's a pretty good idle sprite. So we can drag that into our sprite renderer. And that will give our character a visual. So yippee! Wahoo! Yaha! Still not animated though. We want that to look nicer. So let's take a look at how to add animations onto an object. As a heads up, this works the exact same for 3D animations. Once you have an animation file, it does not matter whether it's 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D, absolutely inconsequential. Just once you get it to an animation file, it will work the same. So let's create an animation file. So first of all, let's go ahead and make walk. Walk should be easy to set up. So in order to make an animation, it's pretty easy. You select the first frame of your animation, and then you can select all of the ones also in the animation. So you can hold Control and go one by one, or you can hold Shift and click the last one if they're all in order. So once you have all of these individually selected, you can right-click, hit Create, and then just over halfway down, there's an animation option. So you can select that, and that will create a new animation and we can name it. So I'm going to name it Walk. So that is now our walking animation. Is everybody getting that? Sweet. So if we want to preview our animations, we need to give it a model. That's this thing at the bottom right that's telling us no model is available. So to do that, we can just drag our player into there at the bottom right. And that will give us a little preview of what this will look like. And if you hit play, you can see, oh hey, our animation plays. In the bottom right, we now have a little dude walking around. That's pretty neat. Let's see if chat has any questions.
No.
Of course not. They're just making memes. Wonderful.
I was sitting there and there wasn't anything.
All right. So does everybody have the walking animation created? You don't necessarily have to have the preview. This is just nice to make sure that your animation doesn't look janky. So now that we have walk, let's create our animator. So there are 2 really important files. There's animation and an animator, also known as an animator controller. It depends. It's kind of, those are interchangeable. So what we want to do is we can just right click and hit create. So this is with nothing selected, and we can hit animator controller. And then I'm going to name this, what are we naming the character? You know what, I'll let chat decide. I'll give chat a few seconds to figure out the name of our character. This is up to you, chat. What is this? What is this guy named?
Shabazz?
What? Shubaz. Okay. Shubaz the Almighty. Okay, I like that. Is anyone else going to put in a name?
Shabazz destroyed the world.
Trevor, we might play Minecraft. Just to. We're not doing that, but. I'm getting nothing else. I'm only getting Shoebaz. Give it 5 more seconds. 5, 4, upvote. Just the name upvote.
No, he's upvoting Shabazz.
So you're upvoting Shoebaz. Nate says down, but it is now at a. Yeah, it sounds like it's Shoebaz. Okay, we'll continue. So our character, so our animator controller, I'm going to call Shoebaz. So this is where we can open up the really, really useful window for animating things. So if you go up to Window, Animation, you should see 3. We want Animator. So this is in Window, Animation, Animator. So if we select that, we get this nice screen. Anybody who's animated in Unity will tell you this is a very, very important screen.
Wait, did you just zoom out?
Yeah.
What?
Wait. No, you're right. How did I zoom out?
What happened? Okay.
Apparently they added zooming in this. That is
Much
incredible.
needed, but
Anyways,
okay.
you used to not be able to zoom out, and it actually made it really obnoxious. But I am happy now. That is nice. So this is our animator, and this controls what animation state we're in. So this is where you can hear the term state machine, which is basically the idea of moving from one state to another with a certain conditional, and maybe back with a different conditional and handling that. So there's a few already set in here. There's entry, any state, and exit. And what these control is basically like a normal state. So if you have a state for your walking animation, entry is just another state like that. And basically entry, there's transitions between states, which are kind of the conditionals, like if this is happening, do this. Entry automatically transitions to the next state, and entry is just the initial state that's called when the object is loaded. So if your character starts out not moving, you would put entry connected to your idle animation because it would immediately switch over to your idle animation. Any state means that any state that you've declared can make the transition that you set. So for instance, if you have a falling animation for when you're falling out of the air, you'd connect it to any state, because if you walk off a ledge, jump off of a ledge, or something else happens, you want to move from anything to falling. So you would have a conditional of if your negative y velocity is past a certain point, then you would go into falling from any state. And then finally, exit. The reason they put exit all the way over here by itself is because you pretty much won't need it, because a state leading to exit just doesn't really it's not useful in almost any situation really, as far as I know. So that's kind of why they just shove it over to the side. Like, you don't really need to worry about it too much. But these are useful. I don't think we'll be using any state today. I think we'll just be using entry and then the things that we define. So this is for our character. We should create our state machine now. So if you right click on an empty space, you can go create state and empty. And this is now our new state. And if you look, it will automatically create a transition from entry. So this is your initial state, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and call this idle, because this will be when we are not moving. This will be just us doing nothing. Then next, I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to call this walking, as this is our walking state. I'm going to create another one called running, because we can walk and run in this game. Very exciting. And then I'm going to create one called jumping. So if you notice, it automatically connected entry to idle, if that's the first one you made. But then all of the others have no connections to them. They have no way to transition from one to the other. So if you right-click on a state, like idle, you can click Make Transition, and then that will give you this arrow that you can use, and you can drag it to another state to create that connection. So I'm going to drag this to walking so that we can move from idle to walking. So if we're not moving at all, we're in idle. If we start moving, we go to walking. So naturally, if you're walking, you should be able to start running. You should be able to go faster. So walking, I'm going to make a transition to running. And once you start running, you should be able to slow down and go back to walking. So I'll make a transition from running to walking. And then you should be able to stop moving, so walking to idle. So this is what your state machine should look like right now. Is that you can go back and forth from idle to walking and walking to running. You don't need to set idle to running in this situation because there's no condition in the game where you would transition from not moving at all to instantly moving fast enough to be running. You would transition to walking and then running. You might be walking for only a frame, but there's not a situation where you'd instantly go to running. So you don't need to worry about setting that. Let's see if chat has any questions. Oh yeah, Zach's having fun with the idea of being able to zoom in and out. It is nice. It was not a feature. You all are taking it for granted. It was, oh boy. So,
GDC Fight Club is a mess in the animator. You can't see that.
I bet.
Yeah, because it uses the animator effectively.
So, now we have these. Now we need to go into our jumping animation. So our jumping animation is a little bit trickier because we can move from any of these into jumping. So first thing first, I'm going to create a transition from all three over to jumping. Now, who can guess why we wouldn't want to make this any state to jumping?
If we're falling, we don't want to jump.
Well, that's true. If we are falling, we wouldn't want to be able to jump. But the issue is actually, unless you finagle with some of the settings, jumping is also a state. So you can move from jumping to jumping, which, if you've ever messed with the animator before, looks pretty silly as your character just does the first frame of jumping and never switches. So your character freezes in midair, and it's really difficult to figure out what's going on with that. So that's why with any state, you just need to mess with the settings to make sure that you can't transition from itself into itself over and over. So we're just going to simplify things and have them all three go to jumping so we can control it easily. So before I set a transition from jumping to any of these, first things first, let's decide what will our conditionals be. So for idle to move to walking, what would be the indicator of that? Does anybody have an idea of what determines whether we're walking or not? We can pretty easily just use our velocity. If we're moving and we're grounded, we're walking. Walking to running, we can say if our speed is over some certain value, then we move to running. We actually don't need to create a transition from jumping to running or jumping to walking. Because if we go to idle, if we just transition to idle and our speed is, let's say, at running speed, it will go to idle, instantly transition to walking, and instantly transition to running. So we can actually simplify that pretty easily.
No, it's on the main menu, so I can give credits.
That's definitely sound.
So that's where even if, that's why I didn't really mention this when I was talking about it before, but even if we moved from idle to running in a single frame, even if we did want to instantly move quick enough, it would just move to walking and then running. because of the way we would set it up. So, this should be what our final state machine should look like. Does everybody have it set up like this? No problems there? We've got it all? All right. So, now we need to actually fill these in with our animations. So, right now we've got our walking animation. So to put that into our walking state, you can click on walking and you get a bunch of options. And we can just drag that up into our motion. Or you can select it using the circle and find walk. So that is now our walking state. As a heads up, this is kind of annoying, but it's how it works. You can modify a bunch of the settings for the walking state, but if you want your animation to loop, you need to go to the animation itself and select loop time. I do not understand why they separate those instead of just making state loop onto itself, but that's just how it goes. It's kind of goofy. So we can fill in all of these. So for our running animation, that's pretty easy. We can just select start to finish. It's a full animation. Create animation. I'll call it run. And we can preview it. So there he is running. A little bit different from walking. We can do our jumping animation. But actually, before doing start to finish on the jumping animation, I actually did something kind of goofy on this. And I actually put two animations in the same sprite sheet. So you notice that our second sprite worked really well as an idle animation, or as an idle sprite of just not moving at all. So the first two of these is actually our idle animation. Our character moves up and down slowly, just kind of like he's waiting for something. Whereas the third frame onwards is our jumping animation. That's our spin. So you can select the third frame onwards to do our jumping animation. Create animation, just like we've been doing. Name that jump. So for these, you want to set loop time, but for jump, you don't. So the reason for that is because I don't want to repeat our jumping animation in midair. We can just play it once and then fall. We also could set a falling animation, but I'm not going to go into that. We're just going to keep it a little bit simpler. And so then finally, for the first two, you can do your idle animation. Now, if you want the idle animation to start standing upright and then crouching, which is what you'll want to do, most likely, remember to select the second one first, then select both, and hit create animation. And that should make it so that it starts not moving. So I'm going to name that idle and loop it. And you can see he's kind of going crazy in the bottom right. So our animation will be much slower. So it will look more natural as an idle pose. I probably could have also recorded this.
Oh, we're not recording the workshop?
Well, I'm streaming the workshop, but you can look back at the stream VODs
Yeah.
and just find it. So
Can
maybe we'll add a link or
Can you
something.
download from it?
Maybe, probably. There's got to be some way to do that.
See you, man.
Yep. See ya. And then there were fewer.
Fear?
Fewer. No, not fewer.
And then there's the fear. Moccasins.
My slippers.
Yeah, not authentic moccasins, man. Yeah, but the
Caleb says, what's going on with the stream? What do you mean, what's going on with the stream?
everything's going on with the stream.
Is the stream not working? Is the sound working? The sound should be working. We're doing productive stuff. Yeah. Anyways, so you should have your animations all laid out now. So we can just drag these into our different states. So idle should have the idle animation. Running should have the running animation. Jumping should have the walking animation. What? Oh. Jumping has the jumping animation. Whoa. Novel. So, right now we have all of our animations set up. And if you were to actually play the game, if you were to start it, you would notice that nothing happens. That's because our animator is not attached to our object. Duh. So, if you select our player has a couple scripts. We'll be going into those in a bit. But for now, you can just drag the animator controller that you made onto your player. And it will link those together. So when you press play now, after dragging in the animator controller, you should see the character doing all sorts of janky stuff. All sorts of janky stuff. But the reason is because we haven't set our conditionals. Right now it's just sort of moving all over the place. I actually didn't know it did that. I'm very confused right now.
Same. I'm guessing they're on end triggers,
Maybe?
and they're not looped. Either that or they're looped.
No, they're loops. Either way, we're going to be setting the conditionals in a second, so that doesn't really matter. But the point is our character is now animated, at least a little bit. Great. If you have let's say you're creating a 2D fireball and you have a looping animation, that is as far as you need to go. If you have it just playing on loop and it's attached in the animator, it doesn't matter. You've got it moving, it looks fine, it keeps animating, you're done. But with something like a character, we need to set the conditionals so that we can move from state to state. So the way we can do that is actually pretty easy to understand, in my opinion. And we can do a lot of that just through the animator. So if you go back into your animator window, you will see that there's this thing on the left called layers and parameters. We're going to go into parameters. So parameters is basically variables unique to an animator that you can use to keep track of moving from state to state. So we can create a few of these. So the first one I'm going to create is a bool. And I'm going to call this grounded.
That's what it is.
Best boolean, you're right. So this variable will be used to tell if we are jumping or not. So all of the transitions to jumping will rely on whether we are grounded or not. So with that in mind, can anybody guess what the other variable we're going to need is if we want to transition from idle to walking and running? Perhaps some variable with speed and velocity. Thank you, Connor. So we can create a float, and we can call this our, I'm going to call it x velocity, because I like to be difficult and I don't want to just call it velocity, because that's not technically accurate. So here you can set the initial values for these if you want. So you can set this to grounded if you'd like. It doesn't really matter. It won't make a difference here, but if you have some initial value you want to set, you can. And so now we just need to set all of these transitions. Yes, there's a lot, but we'll get through them. So, first things first, idle, walking, and running, everything moving to jumping, you can just select all of those at once by holding Control and clicking. And when you have these selected at the bottom right, there's a conditionals, or there's a conditions menu. You can say add. And so you'll see it'll automatically fill in one of our parameters. So let's select x velocity, or no, sorry, grounded. I'm already messing up. So you have grounded, and you can just say false. And what that means is, never mind, you can't select multiple things at once. It only did the last one. I lied to you. I lied to your face. I'm sorry.
They haven't added that functionality yet. It's cool in there.
So you'll have to set those for all of them, that grounded is equal to false for all three of those. So what that means is the moment that grounded variable is false, it will transition, it will make that transition. So it will move to the jumping transition, or to the jumping state. So moving from jumping back to idle, as a random guess of what to possibly look at, would be grounded is equal to true. So once we are back on the ground, we can move back into our idle animation. So everybody got all those 4 transitions so far filled out? Sweet. So for idle to walking, we can go to our conditionals, and this time we can use x velocity, and you'll see now there's more options. It's not just equal to. There's greater than and less than. So we can say when x velocity is greater than 0, move into our walking animation. Likewise, with our walking to idle, we can use x velocity is less than, and we can put some very small number that is our threshold for how much we can move before we actually stop. So I'll do 0.01. That should be plenty low enough. And that's just the properties of a float. That it doesn't really make sense logic-wise to make a float equal to something, because calculations make that really weird and really janky. So now walking to running, we can say when our x velocity is greater than, and then we can give it some number. We will go into the code and determine that number and enter it here. You can also probably get creative and set it. You know what? We will get creative. You know what? We will. That's fine.
We dare to be creative.
We can create another float and call that running speed. So that is the speed when we will start to run. Then while you could set that running speed to a value right there, we can also set that in the code, which we will do in a bit. So we will keep that at 0, but it will, the first thing that happens, we will set that. So right when the scene loads, we will set that to a value. So right now, when x velocity is greater than, shoot, can you compare two things?
No?
Am I just stupid? Did I just completely misremember that? I might have done that. Turns out I'm stupid. We're just going to set that manually. There is a way to do it. I just don't remember how. You might be able to set the conditional in code somewhere, but we're not gonna touch on that. Mostly because I don't want to have to do Google searches in front of everybody.
Want me to do Google searches in front of everyone? Oh, you just have an internal method that sets. No?
But you have to set the conditional. You'd have to
Yeah.
set the condition itself.
Well,
I haven't
no,
done that before.
You just have code that runs conditional and returns a boolean.
Yes. You're correct. I'm going to show it this way because this is still useful to see comparisons in floats. So, Anyways. So now running to walking is very similar. We can put x velocity is less than blank number that we choose, whatever that number is. So, we now have all of our transitions filled out that based on our speed, we'll move from idle to walking to running and back and forth. And then if we're in the air, we're jumping. If we're on the ground, we go back to idle and back to walking or running if that's what we move to. So this is great and all, but we don't actually have grounded or x velocity being set anywhere. These are, grounded is going to stay true, and x velocity is going to stay at 0. So we need to set those in some way. So the way that we can do that is through our scripts. So we're not going to touch on the camera controls, but we're going to be going into our movement and our jumping script. So go ahead and open those. I didn't make you guys write this time because we've written those scripts before plenty of times. So we're going to get into the new stuff. Then you can see my janky code from when I was working on this project. I used smooth damp for velocity. So, open up movement and jumping. And we will start with, which one were we starting with? Somebody pick. Movement or jumping?
Jumping.
All right, we're going to start with jumping. So, here's our jumping script. So it's commented, so it should be clear enough what everything's doing. But what we care about mostly is this bool grounded. That's because in our code, in order to jump in the first place, we are already handling our grounded value. So all we need to do is get that grounded value and put that into the animator value. So the first thing we need to do is set our animator. So we can do animator. It's usually called anim. That's like the industry standard for if you're just doing an animator on something. I've seen it in every example written as anim, so that's what I assume.
Whenever you do get component, I always do self dot and then an acronym. I mean self, like self and or self SR straight.
Well, I know like rigid body RB is the standard.
Yeah.
So like anim, I believe, is the same thing. So we're going to set it the same way as we did RB. We're going to say anim equal to get component animator. And this will get the component attached to this script's object of type animator. So this will get us our player animator. So can anyone give an educated guess on whether setting this code should be in update or fixed update? Anybody got an idea there? Do you remember the difference between animate, update, and fixed update? Nate, you're allowed to answer too if you really want to. Sorry, keep listening to music. I apologize.
No, I'm totally what can I spell? Sorry. Fixed update runs at a constant rate, and then update runs whenever it can.
So we want to put this in. I mean, it was a binary answer. You could have just said one or the other. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So we want to put in an update actually, and that's because update is called every time a frame is updated. So this is visual. So our animator doesn't actually affect our game right now. It just affects what it looks like. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be linked to physics, to our physics engine. It just needs to run with update. So we can just put it in update. So this should be real easy. We can use anim dot set bool. So set and then the type is the method that you use for this. So we can set our bool and then name it grounded. We can call it by the one called grounded in our animator. And the other very useful method is get. You can also do get bool, get float, any of that stuff. You can set and you can get. So we're going to say set bool. We need to give it a name. So I'm going to do grounded. Make sure it is written exactly the same. If you have a capital grounded, make sure it is capital. If you don't have the right case, it will not work at all. And I don't even think it will throw an error. It's very obnoxious. So we can set our grounded to grounded. The value we already have for our grounded. Grounded, grounded, grounded. So with this so far, we should actually be able to see results. If I did it right. So when we press play and our character jumps, you can see we now go into the jump animation and back to the idle animation when we land. Is that working for everybody? Is everyone's doing that? Sweet. So that was pretty simple. Our movement will be a little bit more complicated, but not too much more. So let's go to our movement script now that we're done with the jumping one. And we'll need to do the same thing for our animator. So you can say animator anim. And I should zoom in on this, by the way, my bad. And under start, anim equals get component animator. Again, we've done this plenty of times. Get component. Shouldn't be a surprise. So now we just need to set our value to our current velocity. So we've got our x velocity. We want to set that to our current x velocity that we're using in the code. And so that is referenced in our rigid body. So even though we're using a value that's set with physics of our rigid body, it still doesn't matter whether we can still just call it an update, because regardless, when it's actually updating the visuals is when we care of whether what that value is. We don't really care about getting the value at the right time. We just want to know the value when it's rendered. So we can do anim.set float. I called it x velocity, written like that. And then for our value, we can do rb for our rigid body, dot velocity, dot x. Does anybody see a problem with this? Because there is a problem with this, yeah.
We need an absolute value.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes. I don't know, never mind. Yes, we need an absolute value. So right now, if our velocity is negative, it will always be beneath that threshold. So when our player is moving right, they would work correctly. When our player moves left, they would just idle across the floor in a really creepy fashion. So we can do math dot, is math going to work? Hello? There we go. Mathf dot abs is absolute. And we could just surround our rb.velocity.x in that. So that would get us the absolute value of our velocity. So if we're moving if we're moving negative 10, it will give us 10. If we're moving 10, it'll give us 10. So now let's see, where in the world did I set the speed that you run? So when you're running, you move double speed.
Do you know how to post Jack?
So you can go back to the editor either way. I'm trying to figure out what value we need to set this at. Max speed is 10. So if it's greater than 10, if our speed is greater than 10, we should be running, basically. So in our animator, if you go back here, and you check out the transition from walking to running, we can say x velocity is greater than 10. Likewise, running to walking, we can say less than, and I'll put 10.01, like we had before. So our maximum possible speed we can be moving if we're walking is 10. So if we're at any point higher than that, we are now running. And once we reach 10, back down to 10, we should go back to walking. What?
IRC-GGC is now hosting Stairmaster 7.
Sweet, thank you. Appreciate it. That, yes, that makes things easier. So, let's see what happens. Let's see if it works. There we're idle. There we're walking. And now we're running when we go fast. Backwards. We run backwards. That's probably not good. We probably don't want to be moonwalking everywhere. Maybe that's what your game is based on. I don't know. But
Moonwalker.
that's probably not ideal. I don't know why he's going back and forth between those. You know what, let's maybe give that a bigger threshold. Let's make that 10.1. And maybe less than 0.1 for those. I don't like the way he's going back and forth like that. So, we just need to get him to turn around. Getting your character to turn around is actually super easy. So, we're going to go back into our script. We're going to go into our movement script. And right next to anim, we're going to get another component. And this is in movement. We're going to get our sprite renderer and name it, I'm going to name it SR. That's the standard for sprite renderer. So this is just what loads in our sprite. So the animator cycles which sprite is active. Our sprite renderer is what's actually showing the active sprite. So we can very easily flip this. So in update, I'm going to put it near the end of this. I'm going to do if rb.velocity.x is greater than 0. I'll do greater than 0.1 just to make sure. So this is currently if we are facing right, if our velocity is greater than 0. So I can do sr.flipx is equal to false. So flipx is a Boolean stored in the sprite renderer, and when it is true, it will just flip the sprite in the x direction. So it will reverse it. So we're going to do that. Else if rb.velocity.x is less than negative 0.1, sr.flipx is equal to true. So we want to be reversed. Can anyone tell me why we would not just use else there? Yeah. It's because if we were moving to the right, we would be facing right. But if we were to keep moving, while moving right, we were to then stop, so we were to just let go and stop moving, once we got less than 0.1, we would instantly turn left. And we don't want to do that. So by leaving that little space from negative 0.1 to 0.1 where there's no activity whatsoever, that just means we're going to keep whichever setting we were last using. So if we were moving left, we're going to face left. If we were moving right, we're going to face right. So that's all you need for that. Back into the editor. Again, assuming this worked, we should be able to do nothing. What is wrong? What did I do? Uh-oh, Binky. sr.flip. Oh, that's right. In start, you need to set sr. I forgot about that. If you already did that, then you're better than me. So SR is equal to get component sprite renderer Dunzo. Don't want to forget that. That actually initializes the sprite renderer in the script. So everybody got that? Okay, sweet. So now maybe it will let us turn around. So we can walk right, we can walk left. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. We can run around, frolic, do all sorts of things. We are beautifully animated. So there's a few issues with our animator that we want to fix. First of all, one of the issues is, if you notice, when we are moving, if we are moving very slowly and if we are moving much quicker, our animation still moves at the same speed. This doesn't really give the illusion of actually moving your feet across the floor. This makes it look like we're sliding on ice. So we can modify our animator to work with that. So, for instance, on our walking animation, right now we have speed 1. We can give it, if you highlight parameter next to multiplier, we can basically multiply the speed of our animation by some value. So, conveniently, we already have X velocity set. So all we need to do is, with that speed, we can see, oh, well, now we're moving pretty quick. That's because our X velocity is getting set to 10 right now, so it's multiplying it by 10. So we can give it a much lower value, so I'm going to give it 0.2 and see what it looks like. Well, that's a bit too slow. Let's see, 0.05 maybe? That's not the worst. 0.08. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So 0.08 is a decent value. Or 0.1 or something along there is a good value to use for walking. So when you have that value set at 0.1 and you have it multiplying by X velocity, we can now make it look much better. That way, if we're moving slowly, our feet look like they're actually following the floor a little bit better. And when we're moving quickly, it also looks better. So, back into our animator. We can also set that for running. Also with X velocity. Not sure what speed we want for this. It's not that. Oh my. Looks like he's just vibrating. So let's give that 0.1. See what that does. Okay, 0.1 is also a decent value for running. That even as we're running slower, we'll still be fine. So that is the speed modifications for animator. Those make a game look much more polished, having it actually set your animations based on how fast you're moving. So, I mean, ideally, if you're having a game where you're moving slow and you can move fast, you'd have different animations. You'd have a tiptoe animation and then a walking animation or something similar. But for sometimes it's also great to just have it actually change based on your speed. So, now that we've got that, I had one more thing I wanted to do. Goodness, I can't remember. Anyways, so if you haven't noticed, as we're animating, sometimes our character just gets sort of stuck in an animation. They have to finish the animation before they move on to the next. So that is actually a setting. So for all of these transitions, they have something called exit times. And that's basically the time it takes to move to the next animation. as well as transition duration and all of this. So if we just disable has exit time and fixed duration for these transitions, and I would go ahead and do that for all of them. It should change it so that the animations move instantaneously to the next one, or almost instantaneously. Now they don't quite, and that's because there's also transition duration as well, which you can also set to 0 to really make sure that absolutely nothing is, that it instantly transitions. This is obviously not good practice for a lot of games if you want an animation to only move to another once the last one is finished, if you want it to be smooth. For instance, if you have a 3D animation, you might have the start of one animation from the end of the last. And for that, you would always want it to start when the last one's done. But for a lot of 2D games, like for instance, fighting games, you want your animations to be super quick and to interrupt each other no problem. So if you notice, that actually fixes the issue of our idle to running from jumping, where we jumped and then it would go to idle and then walking and then running. Right now, it just moves instantly. I still don't know why it doesn't like going back to idle
From which one?
from walking.
Because you post a lot?
Well, you stop moving. I mean, you do stop. You do, like, properly stop. Oh my god.
Oh, that thing.
What is walking doing?
So if you're like transition from idle to walking.
Pull it up on both sides. Split screen it.
Hang on. I might have. Greater than 0, do that. Less than 0.1. You know what? Set this to be greater than 0.1. I have the feeling that that bit of overlap is what makes it transition back and forth goofy. There we go. I would also lower your idle speed, please. I forgot about that. It is currently set to way too fast. I'm gonna put it at 0.1 because it is out of control at the moment. There we go. And so now we've got a character that can walk, run, and jump. And looks pretty decent throughout. Excellent. So, I think that's all I had for animations. Pretty simple. Once you create the animation states and the state machine, and then you just set some of the variables, it's pretty straightforward. It's not super complicated. As you get into more complicated games, it might be a much messier in a state machine. Like Nate has his fighting game, so each move has to transition back to the standard one and maybe to each other and doing all sorts of things. So his state machine looks more like a state tree, that it's just going all over the place.
It does do that.
Whereas ours is pretty simple. A really fun thing to do that I always love to do after I've done a bunch of work on an animator, which I encourage you to do because it looks neat, is if you pull up the, it doesn't want to cooperate. If you pull up your animation, if you pull up your state machine while playing the game and you put them side by side, it's a lot of fun to actually watch them transition back and forth.
It's a really good debugging tool.
It is a very good debugging tool because it tells you the how the animation state is doing right now. Like you can see when jumping starts and when jumping finishes.
And right now your transitions are 0, or else you'd see actually another bar.
Oh my god, did you see that?
Huh? What? The return overlap?
So, for instance, speaking of debug, I clearly messed up something when it comes to these values because right now walking and running are basically going at the same time and transitioning back and forth instantaneously. So, because we just learned how to do all this, we can fix it and realize what the problem was. And the problem was I did the same thing as I did before. So greater than 10.1, please. Neat. That should fix that. So as one final little thing, I did put in this smoke animation, and we can slap that into our game, just on the side having fun. So I'm gonna do that. You guys don't need to do this if you aren't inclined to, but I'm gonna make this a little bit neater looking. So I'm gonna create an animation for my smoke. Call it steam. It's steam, not smoke. And then I'm going to create an animator controller and call it steam. Even though they're named the same thing, they are two different types of files, so it doesn't matter. And then in my animator, I'm going to create my standard state. With my steam animation. And that is it. It's just going to loop. I'm going to set it to loop. And then if I create an object, a 2D sprite, I can name it Steam Cloud. And I can just drag in one of those. And as long as I have the animator, I can have a nice looping animation in my game. So I'm actually going to put that over on these pipes as if a pipe is broken. And then I'm just kind of having fun here, but I'm going to create a wind zone, which is something you can do. Something you can do 3D. I don't know if you can do a 2D.
2D effector.
It's just called 2D effector.
Well, you need to make a 2D effector and then set it to a certain type of effector, as well as
Area
2D
effector?
Area effector with a box that is triggered as effector.
Gotcha. So 2D effector. Force angle, that looks like about 45 degrees. Magnitude 10, sure. Global, sure. Let's see if it works at all. How big did I make it? Did I make it anything? Does it have a collider? It doesn't. Whoops. Oh, that's right. I want to do used by effector. You guys don't need to follow along with this if you don't want to. I'm just trying to make a steam cloud that pushes you. Okay, it does push me. It's just not enough. Let's jack that up to, sure. Let's make it blast me. Ooh. So animations aren't very difficult, and they are used in basically everything. And again, 2D and 3D work the exact same once you have these animation files. 2D specifically, you need to take the sprite sheet, spread it out, and select them and hit create animation. 3D, usually you can just import the 3D animations directly or make them in whatever software you're using to make the models. Did you guys have any questions? Let's see if Chad had any questions. Chad, how you doing? Oh boy. I found it. 4D vector, yeah. Matt likes the Steam animation. You know what? That was from that game. That was the one animation I was just really proud of. I liked that one. That took a while to figure out what would look good. I'm very amateur in pixel art animations. But thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. All right. I'm going to leave a few minutes for questions. I'll have chat up. We'll have infinite chat for a bit as the window gets ridiculous. We can slowly watch it. Watch all our souls get sucked into this. Yep. Yep. Nope. Nope. Anyways, post any questions if you have them. That is it for the workshop. Thank you to the people who came in person. Thank you to the people who followed along at home.